In the history of naval warfare, few stories shine with as much bravery and sacrifice as that of the USS Johnston. This small Fletcher-class destroyer played a role so dramatic during World War II that it almost sounds like legend. For many years, her tale was told only through survivors' voices, military records, and books written long after the battle had ended. The ship herself seemed lost forever, swallowed by the deep waters of the Philippine Sea after her last stand in October 1944. But thanks to modern deep-sea technology and the daring spirit of explorer Victor Vespucci, the Johnston's final resting place was discovered more than 75 years later. What made this discovery even more remarkable was not only its depth, the deepest warship wreck ever found, but also the haunting condition of the ship itself. Preserved in the darkness of the ocean, this is not just the story of a wreck. It is the story of courage, sacrifice, and the way history can resurface to remind us of what came before. Through the wreckage, we are brought face to face with the bravery of men who fought against impossible odds, and through exploration, we learn how the past continues to speak. Even from nearly 4 miles beneath the sea, the USS Johnston DD-2-557 was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of America's determination during World War II. Commissioned in 1943, she was designed as a Fletcher-class destroyer, small but versatile, fast, and armed with a deadly mix of guns, torpedoes, and depth charges. At 376 feet long and displacing about 2,100 tons, she was formidable compared to smaller escorts, but nothing compared to the giant battleships and cruisers of the Japanese Navy. The destroyer was named after Lieutenant John V. Johnston, a Civil War officer remembered for his bravery, and her spirit reflected that same heritage. Under the command of Lieutenant Commander Ernest E. Evans, a man known for his fierce boldness and Native American heritage, the ship earned a reputation for courage and determination. At the ship's commissioning ceremony, Evans told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way." Those words were not empty. They became a prophecy fulfilled in battle. The crew, most of them young men, barely out of school, respected their captain deeply. They trained hard, followed his example, and together became a team ready to face challenges at sea. For them, the Johnston was not just steel and guns, it was a home, a place where loyalty and sacrifice were built day by day. The ship's true test came during the battle. Off Samar on October 25, 1944, the Johnston was part of Task Unit 77.43. Known as Taffy 3, a small group of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts assigned to protect American landings at Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. These carriers were lightly armed, meant for air support, not direct naval combat. Suddenly, Taffy 3 found itself facing the full might of the Japanese center force. For battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Among them was the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. The Americans were hopelessly outnumbered. Most commanders would have tried to retreat, but Evans made a decision that would define both his ship and his legacy. Without waiting for orders, he turned Johnston directly toward the massive Japanese fleet. The destroyer charged forward, firing torpedoes at the heavy cruiser Kumano, hitting it hard and forcing it out of battle. Johnston's gunners opened up with everything they had, their shells finding targets again and again. The ship dodged incoming fire, creating chaos for the enemy and drawing attention away from the vulnerable carriers. For more than 2 hours, Johnston fought like a giant, standing between the Japanese fleet and the American carriers. The battle was brutal, and the little ship took heavy damage. Engines were knocked out, the bridge destroyed, and crew members were killed or wounded. But still, Evans and his men fought on. Eventually, the Johnston was overwhelmed, sinking beneath the waves. Out of 327 men, only 141 survived. Evans himself went down with the ship, and was later awarded the Medal of Honor. The Johnston became a legend, remembered as the destroyer that fought the impossible fight. After the Johnston slipped beneath the waves, her story could easily have faded into obscurity. Survivors told their accounts, historians wrote about the battle, and the Navy honored the crew's courage, but the ship itself seemed gone forever. For decades, it remained a legend, a tale of sacrifice remembered only in books, museums, and family stories passed down through generations. The Pacific Ocean, especially the Philippine Trench, is one of the deepest and most hostile places on Earth. At nearly 21,000 feet below the surface, the pressure is over 1,000 times what we experience on land. In those depths, sunlight never penetrates, and temperatures hover just above freezing. Few believed the wreck of the Johnston could ever be found, let alone explored. For nearly 3/4 of a century, the destroyer was thought to be beyond human reach. Yet technology kept advancing, and explorers kept pushing limits. Eventually, the dream of finding the Johnston moved from impossible to possible. What no one knew at the time was that this rediscovery would not just be about steel and wreckage. It would be about connecting past and present, about honoring courage, and about proving that history has a way of resurfacing when humanity refuses to forget. In 2019, the research vessel Petrel, once funded by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, made the first breakthrough. Using advanced sonar scanning, the crew detected what looked like the remains of a Fletcher-class destroyer deep in the Philippine Sea. For days, they had scanned the seafloor with sonar, patiently waiting for something more than shadows and noise. Then, almost like a ghost materializing, the outline of a ship appeared on their monitors. As the image sharpened, the crew realized what they were looking at: the USS Johnston. The discovery was electrifying. The wreck was lying in water so deep it was nearly untouched by time, preserved in silence. Her hull number, 557, was still visible, a haunting reminder of her identity. Guns were still in position, pointed as if frozen in the last moments of battle. Damage from Japanese shells and torpedoes was clear, telling the same story survivors had described decades earlier. For the crew of the Petrel, this was more than a technical success. It was a moment of reverence. They had found not just a ship, but a war grave, a battlefield preserved in eternal darkness. The wreck seemed to whisper the voices of men who had given everything. Yet even with this breakthrough, the wreck had not been fully explored. At over 20,000 feet, the site was at the very edge of what technology could reach. The Johnston was discovered. But she was not yet fully revealed. That challenge fell to Victor Vesevo, a man often described as one of the last great explorers. A retired U.S. Navy officer, financier, and adventurer, Vesevo had already set records by diving to the deepest points of the world's oceans. Through his company, Caladan Oceanic, he commissioned the creation of the limiting factor, a groundbreaking two-person submersible built to withstand the unimaginable pressure of the Hadal Zone, the deepest parts of the ocean. Forged from titanium and designed with advanced engineering, this vessel was capable of repeatedly diving to depths where most submarines would be crushed instantly. For Vesevo, the Johnston was not just another target, it was personal. As a naval officer himself, he felt a deep respect for the crew who had sacrificed their lives in one of history's most lopsided battles. In March 2021, Vesevo set his sights on the USS Johnston. The mission was risky. At nearly 21,000 feet, a single mechanical failure could mean instant disaster. The submersible had to be flawless, the crew had to be ready, and the environment would be merciless. But Vesevo was undeterred. He believed the wreck deserved to be seen properly, studied carefully, and remembered forever. It was not just an expedition into the deep. It was a journey into history. The descent itself was like traveling into another world. As the limiting factor slipped beneath the surface, the sunlight faded quickly, first to dim blue, then to complete darkness. The deeper it went, the more hostile the environment became. Strange bioluminescent creatures flickered in the water, like living stars in an endless night. Temperatures dropped near freezing, and the crushing silence pressed in from all sides. Vesevo relied on sonar pings and navigation systems to guide him, knowing that outside the titanium hull was a pressure strong enough to pulverize steel. Hours passed as he sank deeper, layer by layer, into the abyss. Finally, through the gloom, a shape began to appear. At first it was faint, just an outline. Then the floodlights illuminated steel, battered but still recognizable. The USS Johnston emerged from the darkness, her bow upright, her guns still trained as though bracing for battle. Vesevo later said it was as if the ship was still fighting. The sight was chilling and awe-inspiring at the same time. This was not just wreckage, it was a time capsule. A frozen moment of history preserved in silence. For Vescovo, and for everyone who would later see the images, it felt like standing face to face with courage itself. The details of the wreck told a story no history book could capture. Shell holes pocked the hull, gun turrets were smashed, and parts of the deck were peeled back like paper, all evidence of the furious battle that survivors had described. Yet, despite the violence of her sinking, the Johnston was astonishingly well preserved. In those extreme depths, oxygen is scarce, and sunlight never reaches, meaning corrosion happens much more slowly than in shallow waters. Unlike many wrecks near the surface, stripped by storms or scavengers, the Johnston lay almost untouched. Even after nearly 8 decades, she was instantly identifiable. For historians, the wreck was a treasure trove of evidence. Every mark on the hull, every twisted plate, confirmed survivor testimonies and gave new insights into the desperate fight. For families of the crew, it was emotional proof that their loved one's sacrifice was not just a story, but a reality etched into steel. For Vesovo, it was a moment of profound connection, not just as an explorer, but as a witness to bravery. He had reached the deepest warship wreck ever discovered, and in doing so, had given history back to the world. The discovery of the Johnston was more than a personal triumph. It became a global event. News spread quickly through naval history circles, museums, and even to the families of those who had served on the ship. For decades, these families had only stories and letters. Now, there were images, videos, and 3D models of the very ship their fathers and grandfathers had served on. The wreck was carefully documented using higher-resolution cameras, sonar mapping, and laser scanning. Every detail was catalogued, from the placement of the guns to the alignment of the torpedo tubes. Importantly, nothing was disturbed. The team treated the site as a war grave, respecting it as the final resting place of those who went down with the ship. Instead of bringing artifacts to the surface, they created digital archives and models, allowing museums to recreate the Johnston virtually. In exhibitions, people could explore her decks, see the battle scars, and understand the story in a way that words and photographs alone could never provide. In this way, technology transformed the abyss into a classroom and memorial, ensuring the story of the Johnston would live on for future generations. But beyond the technical achievement, the rediscovery carried a human message. The wreck was not just about steel and weapons, it was about people, young sailors, who fought with unimaginable bravery. At the center of it all was their captain, Ernest E. Evans. As one of the first Native Americans to command a U.S. Navy ship, Evans had already broken barriers. His leadership style was bold, direct, and personal. Survivors often said they followed him not just because of rank, but because they trusted him with their lives. Before the Battle of Samar, he had told his men, "This is going to be a fight. Against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected, we will do what damage we can." These words were not bravado, they were honesty. And his crew responded with loyalty. Many of them were barely adults, yet they stood their ground against one of the most powerful naval forces in history. The wreck itself, lying deep in the trench, bears witness to their defiance. Its guns are still locked in position, its hull still angled forward, as though straining against the impossible. For historians and families alike, the Johnston is more than a wreck. It is a monument to courage. The significance of this discovery extends beyond history and memory. It is also a triumph of technology and human spirit. For decades, the Johnston's location remained unknown because it rested in one of the deepest and harshest environments on Earth. The fact that modern explorers, using cutting-edge engineering and unshakable determination, could finally reach it shows how far human innovation has come. The limiting factor is the only submersible ever built that can repeatedly dive to